justice with economic liberalism. I can't remember where we heard that one before, but maybe his old colleague that he wrote another book with in the 1970s, Gordon Browne, used to talk about that. But obviously there was one very, very liberal essay in there, and I don't know whether we're allowed to mention this here in Polite Society, which was obviously David Laws on the NHS, who made Andrew Lansley look like a member of the Labour Party. So there am I saying that these are quite cheap labels, but nevertheless these labels are out there. What we call the Orange Book crowd, which is David Laws and Nick Clegg, are having a go at the continuity SDP, which is obviously particularly Vince Cable after he let it be known. In fact, every time he stands up, he lets it be known that he's interested in leading this party. They're taking a pop at the continuity SDP because that is where the potential threat to Nick Clegg stands. And let's be honest about this, there's no possibility of a putsch, but certainly his leadership is up there. It is in lights, it is being questioned, not at this conference, but I can bet you in a year's time, if things haven't got better, then I think you'll be seeing and hearing a great deal more from the continuity SDP. And what I really want to say today is if people like Vince Cable and Chris Huhne, if he clears his name, I make my usual declaration when I talk about Chris Huhne, which is that he's my stepbrother, just so you all know where I'm coming from on that one. What I would say about these two sort of great figures in the continuity SDP, these two figures on the left, is that these two great figures on the left are actually responsible for two fundamental decisions of this government, which are, if we're using cheap and easy labels, somewhat on the right. So Nick Clegg apologised last week for the tuition fee policy. Who introduced the tuition fee policy? Vince Cable. Everything that this coalition government flows from the decision that the coalition made on the deficit. Who in this party was absolutely determined and pushing this party to take a really, really tough stance on the deficit? Chris Huhne, who told us if we didn't do that, we would end up like Greece. Now, obviously, that is a matter for economic debate, but that is what he said. So I just think it's important that when we sort of think of these labels, that we bear in mind where the sort of the continuity SDP crowd are coming from, and then ask this question, because if they are going to replace Nick Clegg, not challenge him but replace him, then obviously they are, in Vince Cable's case, going to sort of flirt with the idea of positioning this party to the left, which obviously is a very tempting prospect when your poll ratings are as they are. But if you're going to position this party to the left, there's only one way you can do that, which is to disassociate yourself from this coalition. Because what this coalition has done on the deficit, I don't think can be described as particularly on the left. So the only way you can do it is to distance yourself from that. Matthew Oakeshott does that every other day of the week when he's on radio, but Matthew Oakeshott is not a member of this government, and it is very difficult to see how a member of this government, should one of them become leader, is going to disassociate themselves from what this government has done. And so, whilst it may be very attractive to think of a future on the left, and maybe eventually that's where the future is, no one who sits in this coalition cabinet is credibly going to be able to do that. But clearly, this government, this party needs to differentiate itself, put some clear yellow water between it and the Conservatives, and clearly that's what you're going to see. We're hearing all this talk of a wealth tax, which essentially Nick Clegg saying to George Osborne, you're saying you need an extra 10 billion welfare cuts. Okay, 10 billion's fine, but it doesn't all come from welfare tax. Some of it's got to come from taxes on the wealthy, and I think that you're going to see that differentiation. Anyway, that is a whiz-through of what I plan to say it much more quickly because you will ask questions.
Thank you very much. Ruth Porter at the back with a handheld mic. Because time is a little against us, I'm going to take 2 or 3 contributions at a time. So if you can wait till the microphone gets to you, and then if you'd be kind enough to say your name and where you're from, that would be a great help. So I'll take this gentleman here.
Hello, I'm Paul Fox, I'm a councillor in Bath. I'm glad the last speaker actually opened up the macroeconomic argument, because so far we've discussed it entirely in terms of the role of markets within the public sector, which frankly I don't think is the main issue facing the country at the moment. The main issue is that we are in the depths of a global recession, and I'd actually like to see this government acting on the international stage with other governments to fix the global banking system and get the world economy moving. And I have to say that this entire focus that we've made on the deficit, as if solving the deficit is actually the only way of achieving all these other things, is the message we could putting across, is a complete misrepresentation, in my view, of this party's tradition and history and that great liberal John Maynard Keynes. And I think that I'd like to see that, what the panel's reaction to that is, and where that fits in the Orange Book versus Social Democrat debate.
Thanks. I'll take the gentleman right at the back, standing up.
I agreed a lot with what Nick Watt said.
You say you are?
I am Duncan Stott from Oxford East. I agree with what Nick Watt said in terms of how lazy these two alleged camps are, the Orange Bookers or the Social Democrats. It's not only lazy, it's probably very inaccurate. I see good ideas coming from both wings, as it were. I think most of the membership of this party is somewhere in the middle of these two ideas and sees the useful conflict between them. And I also think it's not only lazy and inaccurate, I also think it's deeply damaging because it means that one side of the party can be the Labour sort of wing and the other side is the Tory sort of wing, and this idea that we're just this sort of confused bunch which is really fitting into this red-blue existence, which is just totally false and not where politics really is.
Lematopic, or at least I used to be lematopic. I'm co-author of a book called The Alternative View. Paul Marshall will be glad to know that myself and Ed Joyce, the other author, we've both read not just the Orange Book, but its sequel, really the other half of your volume, which is Britain After Blair. You said we must all be Orange Bookers. What does that mean? When we looked at the Orange Book and Britain After Blair, we found no ideology which united those books. One chapter, I think it was, there's an element of opposition to nuclear power. Meanwhile, Chris Huhn, another Orange Booker, says he's in favour of nuclear power. Vince Cable, in his chapter, says there should be continuous revolution in the European Union. Nick Clegg explicitly uses the opposite terminology. In another place, you see a very authoritarian approach by Steve Webb to certain elements of rearing children, while David Laws is explicitly libertarian on that. Therefore, when you say that this was an ideology, I take the exact opposite view. I suggest to you that the problem with the Orange Book is it doesn't have a uniting ideology, which means that unlike the Conservatives, we're now in a situation of drift. So my question to the panel is, first of all, specifically to Paul Marshall, please explain to me what it means to be an Orange Booker, except to be part of a power base which has been superbly successful. And secondly, why is it that the Orange Book is not willing to tolerate a debate with the other parts of the party? Is it because you're threatened by that, or is it because you really don't think a more libertarian left-wing agenda is correct? And if that's your view, then I couldn't disagree with you more.
Thanks. Let me bring the panel back in. I have to say, I think this is the second or third REA debate I've chaired. Every time we do sort of the right versus the left, or the Orange Book versus the Social Democrats, everybody says it's not that simple, but it's always also standing room only for the Democrat delegates. So we've learned by trial and error to keep with a simplification, even if it's criticised by the panel of being an oversimplification. Paul, can I come to you first? Pick up any of those points. We need to get the world economy moving again. In fact, there isn't this divide in the party, and in fact, that the two books you've published, then but also referred to Britain After Blair, don't constitute an ideologically consistent liberal view of the world.
First to Lembit, I mean, to some degree, I take your criticism because of Britain After Blair. That was not a particularly well-conceived book because it used Orange Book branding, but it had a huge number of contributors, and therefore it lacks the same philosophical coherence. So I would accept that point. In terms of the Orange Book, obviously I did an extremely bad job in my speech, and indeed Jeremy, because I thought we both said very clearly that the Orange Book stood for 4 pillars of liberalism, which are part of our party's tradition stretching back over 100 years, all 4 of which are critical to our being, in fact, all highly relevant today and critical to us being effective in government. And when it comes to the conflict, we were settling on the point that ultimately you have to be economically literate, recognizing the constraints we're working under, and be willing to use a variety of economically liberal means to do the social liberal ends. That is the message of the Orange Book, and I hope I've done a better job this time. Can I just briefly answer the first question? I agree with you. I think that this government has done a poor job of banking reform. We failed to work on a global basis. Americans have done a much better job of banking reform, recapitalised their banks earlier, using state-run bodies to lend, which of course is not Orange Book, but it's Chinese actually, very, very effective for their economy. And we need much greater global convergence of banking regulation. And I also agree with you that, I think that's what you're saying, that we've done a very bad job, the government, in relation to one aspect of the deficit, which is to have slashed investment spending so aggressively at the beginning. Keynes would never have prescribed that. Partly civil servants, partly George Osborne, partly us not standing up to them. And as a result, we've completely withdrawn the multiplier from the economy, focusing on consumption rather than investment, repeating the mistakes of the Labour Party at the end of their term, and not doing it properly ourselves. So we've got to get back on track, and I think now, in the next iteration, the leadership and indeed some of the Conservatives are understanding important investment.
Let me bring in the government minister on that. I can't resist the opportunity to get in the IA's analysis for all of the talk of huge deficit reduction and cuts in public spending. Cuts in public spending are, I think, a little less than 1% per annum, and it is the Chancellor of the Exchequer's professed desired policy to run over the course of this 5-year Parliament £600 billion in deficit, add 600 billion to the national debt, which by my back of the envelope calculations will make it the biggest Keynesian fiscal stimulus since we received Marshall aid from the Americans in the aftermath of World War II. So just wanted to put some numbers on what the supposed austerity package is. Over to you, Minister.
You've covered essentially that point, which is that our government is borrowing £1 billion every 3 days, and that represents a level of stimulus which is not sustainable in the medium term, but we are managing to sustain in the short term because we have managed to convince people that we are credible as a government. But I wanted to touch on three brief points. One is I thought Paul Marshall made the best speech I've ever heard at a party fringe, and I'll tell you why I think that is because the easiest thing to do at a party fringe is to stand up and put, in charismatic terms if you can, false choices that pander to your audience. And I thought Paul confronted the party in this room with the very serious choices that we faced running up to that 2005 election, and to look at those 10 pledges in 2005 from the perspective of time was to realise, I think, how far we were from government a short period ago compared to the big choices we make in government now. But my two big points, one of them is coming back on Evan and the other is based on the first question. We're talking about supermarkets. There is no cause more unfashionable at a party conference of Liberal Democrats than to extol the merits of supermarkets, or even to recognise they have any merits at all. But I read 2 books on my summer holiday. Both good liberal themes. One of them was an American novel by Jonathan Franzen called Freedom, and the other one was Sir Terry Leahy, the former chief executive of Tesco's, book about his period at Tesco. And I thought the second was well worth reading for any liberal who is confronted with a massive, massive deficit. Why? I've become Home Office Minister, and the question is still put to me endlessly: how can you be serious about tackling crime if you're not going to spend more money on the police? There is still a sense that the only way that you can get better performance in the public sector is to spend more taxpayers' money. And yet we are not in that era. Apart from some very selective areas, we are not going to be in a position for many years to come to try and solve problems by spending more money on them. And if you read that particular book, he might have been talking about Tesco's, but he could have been talking about service delivery across any number of areas. Because what happened, their costs went up in terms of labour, their costs went up in terms of tax, their costs went up in terms of energy, and yet the prices, the quality and the choice all came down. And that has got to be good for the consumers. And how do I know it's good for the consumers? Because their market share went up, because people chose to shop there. They weren't compelled to shop there, but they had put a proposition in front of consumers which was extremely competitive and extremely compelling. And it is a height of arrogance to think that there is nothing to be learned from the choices that millions of British people make every day in responding to that quality of management, or that the public sector can't learn to any degree at all from that. My final point was the point of the first question. which is, I wouldn't allow yourself to believe we're in a global recession. Until a few weeks ago, I was the minister who covered Asia and Latin America, and we most emphatically are not in a global recession. We are in the biggest transformation that's taken place in the world since Industrial Revolution, rise of America, arguably ever. The global economy is worth 60 trillion US dollars. It will be worth 200 trillion in a generation from now. There's a massive explosion of wealth, but it's not happening in our part of the world, but it certainly is happening in Asia, and there are some big lessons that we need to learn about that. And some of it is about infrastructure, but the problem is that there is a perfect storm. And the perfect storm is that at the point where we have become most complacent and where the result of living beyond our means for many years has caught up with us, just at that point, the rest of the world has become far more competitive. And unless we raise our game, we will struggle to deliver the levels of prosperity and living standards for future generations that we have come to expect in previous generations. And that is the biggest choice facing us as a country, and without understanding that, all of our domestic decisions, in my view, don't make sense, because we are undertaking a task of trying to make sure that our country can make a successful transition through to a new world order while continuing to have the levels of public services and the living standards that we hope and expect.
Thank you. I'll ask Evan and Nick for some quick remarks as well, because I'd like to get one, if not two more rounds of questions in if I can.
And I think I may have to go before the next round, and I won't have a chance, therefore, to say to Nick now where I think some of his analysis was wrong and some of it was right. Maybe we can have dinner later. And we are.
It's already in the diary.
It's in the diary.
Otherwise, put a maybe.
So I will save that. But and I didn't obviously, Paul, mean to offend you by calling you a benefactor on the right of the party. But your revenge, as it were, I think needs to be challenged. That social liberals or people who disagree with you are opposed to all public service reform. Absolute. What's the word? I'll come back to that. So let's take
Charlie Whelan's word.
Let's take so schools have to be part of a monolithic state. I mean, I remember local management of schools, which was delegation from this terrible tyranny of what's it called, local democratic control and coordination, which Liberal Democrats believe in and should believe in. And that was trialled in Cambridge, and we were supporters of it, because we believe that schools should have individual freedoms, but there shouldn't be two-tierism. All schools, this is our policy, all schools should have those freedoms, but there should be local, remember that word, democratic, terrible thing, okay, control and coordination and planning, so that no child is left behind, okay? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And then also the assertion was made that those people who oppose academies and free schools because of the two-tierism that it creates and the fact that there is no longer any local democracy involved in the planning of those schools are in favour of bad schools. I mean, I just think that's the debating style of the sub-sixth form, because I would never say that because if you support the use of markets in the NHS, you want patients to suffer. I'm happy to think you're wrong, but I wouldn't mislabel your arguments in that way. And let's be very clear, I recognise, social liberals recognise, that we are in a time of austerity. We're not going to see big increases in healthcare spending. So people like me want to see more effectively, more rationing, more honesty about the fact that certain things won't be available on the health service, but that it must be done fairly. It mustn't be devil take the hindmost. It should be that treatments that are less effective, okay, should not be provided, because it means that someone else doesn't get more effective treatment. But in the name of choice, Conservatives say that we have to spend millions of pounds on a totally ineffective treatment, homeopathy, because patients want it, they want the choice. But those 10, 12 million pounds spent on that means that other people are denied the ability to access effective treatments, and that is wrong. So this mantra of choice actually goes against the effective delivery in public services in some areas. Finally, I just want to explain what I think the issue. It says the Orange Book was responsible, made the coalition possible. No, I think the parliamentary arithmetic made the coalition possible. People like me who are never orange, steer clear of the tanning studios, think it was the right thing to do to enter that coalition. But what? No, I think we wouldn't. We'd probably support the rules that say parents shouldn't shove their children in tanning studios in the name of choice, because they're vulnerable, but adults can do what they like. But just this point, what the Orange Book did was make the tuition-free debacle possible. Because what happened was that the party wanted to retain, okay, that spending priority, okay, recognised it had to be costed and there would be other things that would have to suffer. You may think that's right or wrong, but they wanted to retain it. But what we did do at the Federal Policy Committee was we had to concede that it would take 7 years to deliver, okay, to make it affordable and achievable, and that was agreed, okay? But what the Orange Bookers did was say, well, we're going to ditch that at the earliest opportunity, despite the pledge, because we never really supported it, despite the cost that that would have, because the public and the media understood that was our priority. That was putting ideology before an honest relationship with the electorate. That's why we're in the mess we're in over that. That's why the apology was needed. But the apology should have been for not fighting harder to retain the one costed and affordable over 7 years commitment we had, rather than to ditch it at the first opportunity when they lost the argument in the party.
If I can come back to on first and the next round of questions, if that's all right, just to make sure that we can get some more people in. I'll take the gentleman at the back, then Ruth, it'll be the gentleman here, and then the gentleman in the front row.
Thank you very much. I'm John Humphrey. I'm from the constituency of St Albans. I've been a member of the Liberal Democratic Party for 4 years. I have never, prior to that, been a member of any political party. The reason I put my hand up was because I think this meeting, for me anyway, is a little bit disappointing. When I joined the party because I believed it was the most progressive political party in the country. And I wanted to contribute to the activities of that progressive party. Listening to stories about how liberalism was based upon the good works of people in the 19th century, references to Winston Churchill being a great liberal. This was indeed the bloke who left the gold standard, led the drift from the gold standard in 1926 and destroyed the UK's economy. That's a great piece of liberal activity.
Can we have a quick question, please, rather than an overview of all of 19th century or 20th century?
You guys started it.
Sir, the deal here is we're going out for questions, not lectures. We have 3 minutes left, so if you can ask a very quick question.
Sure, yes. I think it's extremely sad that this debate is taking place. I don't give a toss about Orange Bookers. I really don't give a great deal for the Social Democrats. You know, those are things in the past. Let's actually focus on talking about the future. Thank you.
I'm slightly going to say, if you don't give a toss about Orange Bookers or Social Democrats, why attend a meeting entitled Orange Bookers versus Social Democrats? So I'm surprised you're disappointed. It does exactly what it said on the tin. Anyway, sir.
I give quite a big toss about it. My name is Michael Mumford, I'm from Lancaster, and I joined the Liberal Party as it was then 50 years ago. I was then an undergraduate in economics, and I've studied economics pretty well all my working life, having taught at Lancaster University. And the thing that concerns me most about talk about markets and competition is we completely fail to recognise there are two completely different ends of the spectrum when it comes to markets and competition. The whole analysis of market economics in the 19th century was a brilliant conceptual idea. It depended very much on having intelligible products which could be traded in markets with the suppliers and customers coming together, understanding what the commodities were and so on and so forth. Over the last 50 years, at least 40% of the economy, and probably more, has consisted of different types of transaction in relationship contracts that go on for years and years and years, where the relative power of the parties is so important. Transaction cost economics came in as a completely different branch after I started studying it and did my postgraduate work. And that, from 1980 or so onwards, has explained why it's very difficult and costly to make choices in many areas. And I think the health service is preeminently one. Education actually is another one. And I could give lots of examples, but I've got no time. But for heaven's sake, make a difference between competitive areas where people can understand what they're buying and selling, which is what supermarkets do extremely well, and many other areas of the country, of the economy, where people cannot make informed choices. And governments particularly are very bad at making purchasing decisions.
Thank you. I'll take the final question from the gentleman in front.
This one's Jeremy.
You say you are for everybody.
Sorry, John Ashmore from politicsand.com. Jeremy, this is just become a Home Office Minister. This morning Vince said he's always had a very hawkish approach to immigration, with their aspiration to cut it down to 100,000 net a year. What's the Liberal approach to immigration?
Thank you. I'll let our panellists respond to those points and give any final thoughts that they wish, because we've only got time. I've got about 20 seconds left to go. But so we haven't got any time for more questions, I'm afraid. Let me start with Nick, then I'll take Paul, and Jeremy, you'll have.
Well, I'm off the hook from John's question because I'm a journalist, so I don't have to answer questions to a journalist. This is the thing about coming to the Liberal Democrat fringe, is that you get really terrifying questions from Michael, who's been a member of this party, well not this party, predecessor party, 50 years, and is clearly a very, very articulate and distinguished economist, so you've really got to brush up. What I would say to John, who said that he's disappointed, you hope for a discussion about progressive policies. I mean, I obviously am not a member of the political party, but if you're saying you don't think this is a progressive party, well, you know, Nick Clegg, Vince Cable, Danny Alexander have, by the end of this Parliament, take the personal tax allowance up to £10,000. That is going to make quite a big difference to people on low incomes. And also is the aspiration of this side of the coalition to legislate for gay marriage. Now, if those two things are not progressive, equal marriage, correct. If those two things are not progressive, then I don't know what are. But the final thought I have was really from what Paul was saying when he asked about sort of macroeconomic policies and was raising concerns about the deficit. And Paul here was saying perhaps this coalition did the deficit too quickly. Well, the problem is that you know, the Liberal Democrats can't sort of just say, oh, maybe it was too fast. They have got to take complete responsibility for what happened, and I think this raises a real problem for this party, which is that it was a hung parliament, and their role in that hung parliament was to act as a check on the largest party. And the danger for them, and the argument they've got to explain, is that they did act as a check and not as an enabler, because the instructions from the electorate were not to enable the Conservatives, it was to act as a check on them. Anyway, clarify, I say that as somebody who's not a member of any political party.
Paul.
All I would like to do is just two clarifications, actually. Firstly, to what Nick said, my comment about the deficit was less about the speed of cutting it, but about the nature of spending in the economy and the role of government. At the moment, the markets want the government to invest. That's why the gilt yields are where they are. There is a chronic it's been the history of this country for 40, 50 years, chronic underinvestment by the government in our infrastructure, particularly in our people and skills. And unfortunately, Whitehall operates on the basis that all costs are the same because they don't have a balance sheet. And the result of that is that the easiest thing to cut when you come into power is investment. So what happened? Slash investment by half. And that was a catastrophic decision. I'm not referring to the overall pace of the deficit reduction. Secondly, the other point of clarification, Evan quite a lot used the word choice and markets to describe the quote-unquote orange book approach to public services, which is, some questions have also used that. I think that's also a danger of being a caricature of a position, because the real thing that I personally believe in, and indeed that Vince and David wrote about, was pluralism of provision, which is not the same as choice or using a market mechanism. What I believe is fundamentally changing British education is the fact that you have multiple different providers with highly motivated people running governing bodies or chains of schools. And we've seen the same thing in the United States and in Sweden. Huge improvements in the outcomes for the schools, especially with the Adonis, first wave of Adonis schools. That is absolutely, there's no debate that is to the benefit of our children. And frankly speaking, it's about your hierarchy of values. For me, the children are more important than our local authority powers or even the teachers. What are schools for? They're for children. And therefore, if your priority is to help children do better, to create equality of opportunity and social mobility in this country, you have to go for the reforms that help the children.
Paul, thank you.
Well, 3 points. One is, I actually welcome having an ideological discussion. I joined the party in 1988 after I'd done my A-levels. People you always used to say, oh, were you a Liberal or a Social Democrat? And actually I joined the Lib Dems about a month after we were formed, so I never had to answer the question. At the point where we were losing about 5,000 members a week, I'm not quite sure, we were on about 4% in the polls, so I obviously thought that was a good proposition. I'll be a government minister in 22 years if I hitch myself to that bag. Anyway, that's when I joined. But I thought then a lot of our debates were about us feeling under siege, and it was about survival. And actually having the confidence to discuss ideas and what we believe in, I think that's very healthy. Second point, so I was asked specifically on immigration. How do we respond? How do countries in the historically prosperous Western world respond to globalisation and the massive, spectacular rise of the East in particular? I think there are two instincts in conflict. One of them is to try and hoard what you have, to pull up the drawbridge, try and keep out the rest of the world. Quite a lot of the debate within Europe is informed by that, and not just on the far right. There's quite a big protectionist streak on the left as well. I think that is a very bad approach. I think our approach should be to embrace the opportunities that are provided by globalisation, to be confident that we can be competitive in a more competitive world if we take the right approach. But I will say, in fairness to the government, I think it is entirely legitimate to have rigorous processes to check that there are not immigration abuses. And there were large numbers of people in the previous government who were coming here on visas which were not relevant to the activity that they were undertaking when they were here. And for example, I think actually people coming here on study visas when they're not studying undermines the people who are legitimately coming here on study visas. And all countries have immigration controls, and I don't think that you show that you have an enlightened view about immigration by not enforcing your controls properly. So I think we need to have a level of immigration which can be assimilated into our society and takes account of a whole range of factors, and it has rigour in its application, but I want us to be an outward-looking country that sees London, our capital city, and our country as a whole as a hub for global activity, including people from all around the world. And my final point is this one, and it's very brief. Liberalism, I started at the beginning, liberalism for me, the freedom to be who you are, whether it's the state or society that threatens that, and the opportunity to realise your potential. That for me is the sort of essence of liberalism. It does not say, with an asterisk, as long as the state delivers both of these for you. The state is a means to an end, the private sector is a means to an end. We shouldn't be attached to one over the other, we should be attached to the end of the journey.
It just leaves me to thank you, our audience, for coming. Sorry we're only able to get in 6 or 7 questions. To remind you, if you haven't signed the IEA sheet and want to join our email list, please do. To further remind you that Economic Affairs, the special edition on the Orange Book, is available at the back of the room. And please join me in thanking our panel, even though Nick will have to pass on our thanks.